In February of 1993, a band booked by the alias of the Simon Ritchie Bluegrass Ensemble walked through the doors of this very guest house at Pachyderm Studios in Cannon Falls, Minnesota, to settle in before they began work on their third studio album. They would go on to live here for the next 2 weeks in a tiny and remote Minnesota town in the dead of a snow-heavy winter, completely isolated as they worked on what would become widely regarded as not only their best work, but one of the greatest rock albums of all time. The Simon Ritchie Bluegrass Ensemble was actually Nirvana. From February 12th to 26th in 1993, Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, Dave Grohl, audio engineers Steve Albini, Bob Weston recorded in Utero, Nirvana's unfiltered and raw masterpiece, the final studio album of a very short yet historic career, which is both a reflection and a progression of everything that came prior to it. As a lifelong Minnesotan, there are many Minnesota music landmarks that I can tell you about. There's Prince's Paisley Park, First Avenue, the Minneapolis Bob Dylan mural, Albert Lee, the city where early rock and roll pioneer Eddie Cochran was born and raised, the Mall of America, which was once the Metropolitan Stadium where the Beatles played their one and only Minnesota concert. Those are all super cool and noteworthy, but there is nothing I'm more proud of than my state being home to the legendary Pachyderm Studios. Not only did Nirvana record my favorite album of all time there, but a plethora of timeless music has come out of these walls, including classic work by PJ Harvey, local heroes Babes in Toyland, Soul Asylum, Hum, Alkaline Trio, Trampled by Turtles, and Norma Jean, just to name a few. For years, I have dreamed of just simply walking through those doors to physically see and feel the history of the rooms there. I live just under an hour and a half away from Pachyderm, and I recently had the immense honor of not only getting to tour the entire facility, but of capturing footage of just about every corner of every room there. I have to give the absolute biggest shout out and thank you to Nick and the entire team over at Pachyderm. You guys truly made this Nirvana nerd's dreams come true by welcoming me in so warmly. In this video, we'll be doing a guided history tour of In Utero, going through the story of the making of that album while visiting the actual locations that these events took place at. My main source for the bulk of the information regarding these sessions is livenirvana.com, the greatest website in the world and the absolute authority for all things regarding concrete, verified facts around Nirvana's history, recordings, and gear. As of 2020, the city of Cannon Falls has a population of 4,220. Looking back 30 years at the 1993 consensus shows that its population that year was 3,397. When driving through the city, you quickly feel the vibe of a small town that hasn't expanded much in the past 3 decades, with locals probably recognizing everyone they see as they walk into the local gas station. Having visited Aberdeen, Washington myself twice, Cannon Falls gave me that same rural, small town, close-knit feeling that I can't help but imagine that both Kurt and Chris instantly recognized as they drove in. This is definitely not a town that you'd think a milestone rock album would be recorded in. If you're not looking for it, you'll completely pass the studio without even realizing it. It is discreetly concealed behind a sea of trees and an entrance gate. The word pachyderm is Greek for having thick skin. It derives from the term pachydermata, an obsolete 19th century taxonomic order of mammals that included elephants, rhinoceros, and hippos. The studio fully embraces the heritage of its name, as the entrance has these 3 beautiful elephant statues. When you arrive, you are immediately met with the guest house, where artists live on site during their time there so they can be completely immersed in the work that they are doing. Just you working on your music all day and then retreating to a very cozy and luxurious cabin-style home that was built in the 1960s. Kurt and Chris first arrived together at Pachyderm on February 12th, with Dave arriving the next day. Besides the band, the only other people present for the sessions were engineers Steve Albini, Bob Weston, house engineer Brent Sigmeth, chef Carter Launt, and her dog Z. A week into the sessions, Courtney Love flew in with baby Frances Bean Cobain. When you enter the home, immediately you see this balcony overlooking the amazing first level, which I imagine is where most people would go to first. But as a Nirvana diehard, I was of course immediately drawn to the famous fireplace. As storied as the Utero sessions are, we have very little actual footage of the band in there. This is perhaps the most famous and well-known shot from the session. The band, Steve Albini, Bob Weston, and baby Frances sitting right here. Logically, of course, this is the photo I was most excited to get going into this tour. An average day here for Nirvana would begin around 10 a.m. with breakfast. They would then record from noon to midnight. Lunch would be delivered to the studio mid-afternoon, and dinner would be around this big table in the evening. Chef Lant has recalled that Chris was a vegan, Dave an all-around American eater, and Kurt had an erratic eating schedule with a preference for frozen pizza. Around the corner from the kitchen is a laundry room and a retro-style living room featuring some great vintage-looking guitars. Across the hall from the living room area is this room. Legend has it, this is where Kurt stayed. This is just one of the many guest rooms, as we'll see now as we venture downstairs. There's a gorgeous living room area that gives you a breathtaking view. In all the books and documentaries, I've always heard about how isolated the Utero sessions were, and physically being there really confirms that. Looking outside here, you see nothing but wilderness. You are almost engulfed by the beauty of the great outdoors of Minnesota. Did you guys know that Pachyderm has an indoor pool? I had no idea until I was there and saw it. It's been here ever since the house was built in the 60s. There are many more guest rooms here on the bottom level, and it's been said that Chris, Dave, and Steve all lived on this level. Let's go back up to the kitchen for a second to explore this beautiful outdoor walkway and deck. There are some stairs that lead you down to the beautiful serenity of the nature that Pachyderm lives on. Truly an amazing sight. From the guest house, the band would have walked this very path every day to get to the studio, which is a separate building on the property. Walking up these steps, I instantly recognized the deck from that goofy video of Dave and Chris throwing cymbals at icicles.
My name's Dave, and I'm the drummer of Nirvana. I use Zildjian cymbals because they turn inside out, you can sled on them, and you can also use them to bust icicles off the side of the studio, like this. What are you, crazy?
When you walk in, you are first in a small kitchen-like area which houses almost all of the gear that the studio offers on-site for artists to use. They have a seriously mind-blowing collection of gear. As you can see here on the lower level, there are many amp options. Going up this ladder right here brings you to an upper bunk where Pachyderm's vast library of drums and guitars live. It didn't hit me while I was there. I realized after the fact that some of the drums for Utero were actually recorded in this entryway. To quote the great Steve Albini, "We broke the session down into a couple of different setups. For songs that didn't need the big, booming ambient sound, like the songs with faster, more punk sort of sound, we set up the drums in the kitchen of the studio, which had closer walls and a boxier sound. Then for the songs that were more open and atmospheric, we had the drums in the large live room. From this initial entry room, you go into what is used as an isolation room. It's been said that this is where Kurt's amp was set up. According to Albini, The album's strained, distorted guitar sounds came from a Fender quad reverb amp, with 3 of its 4 power tubes broken or missing. This is the room where that quad would have been. Personally, Radio Friendly Unit Shifter is my favorite in Utero song. While in that room, it was so crazy to think that at one point in time, this small room was engulfed in the crazy, swirly, echo flanger, alien-like sounds that define that song. From this isolation room, we walk into the live room, the room where it all actually happened. As a Nirvana fanatic, I've been very lucky to visit many Nirvana locations. I've been to Washington State twice and did the Nirvana pilgrimage both times. As cool as it is to see those houses and the cities, absolutely nothing compares to physically being in the live room where those sounds were actually produced and captured. The album was tracked live in this very room. With Albini saying, "We recorded a couple of songs in the first day. We probably committed 4 or 5 masters for the record done in that first day." And that's a huge confidence builder when you can chop a lot of wood in a hurry and everything sounds really good. Christ has said in interviews that the very first thing the band played in this room was Serve the Servants, and that either the first or second take ended up being the master that we hear on the album today. While in here, one can't help but imagine Dave beating the life out of his drums while tracking Scentless Apprentice. The band was so tight and ready to go for this session that Dave's job was done pretty quickly. To quote Dave, "I was done after 3 days. I had another 10 days to sit in the snow on my ass with nothing to do." According to Albini, the only songs that took more than a couple of takes were Heart-Shaped Box and Penny Royalty. After all the basic live tracks were recorded, Kurt then did his vocals and guitar overdubs. The following is Steve Albini speaking about those overdubs. Kurt had some secondary guitar ideas on a lot of songs that he hadn't tried in the demos, so he was kind of excited to get those additional parts put together. Some of them were counterpoint, some of them were contrast, and some of them were just bolstering what was already going on. But he was adamant about having the 3-piece band supplemented by this phantom 4th member pretty much all the time. In his Reddit AMA from a few years ago, Steve Albini listed all the guitars that he saw Kurt use in this room. He listed Kurt's Mustang, Jaguar, a Univox High Flyer, a custom Jaguar Mustang Hybrid, and Steve's own Volino, which he restrung for Lefty. Nirvana guitar tech Ernie Bailey, the guy who prepped and set up all the gear for these sessions, has said that it's understood that Kurt used his Sunburst Univox High Flyer Phase 1 for the majority of the guitar tracks. And Kurt himself is on record saying that the Volino was used for Variate. Kurt's vocals were recorded in this room in a single 7-hour marathon session. According to Albini, Kurt had his Stella Harmony acoustic guitar in his lap and strummed along while he was singing. There are various points in the album where his Stella can just barely be made out. Of the few photos we have of these sessions, this one has always been my favorite. It shows which mics were used for capturing vocals and where Kurt physically was. We tried our absolute best to recreate this shot and find the exact spot where the vocals were recorded at. In front of Kurt during this marathon vocal session would have been these 2 large windows, overlooking the vast, beautiful scenery outside. While you and me today are seeing a lush sea of green, Nirvana was here in Minnesota in February. It was making my head spin imagining Kurt singing about the sun in All Apologies while looking out and seeing everything covered in a thick blanket of Minnesota snow. Another thought I had replaying in my head is the image of Kurt standing in this room alone, headphones on, screaming his guts out to milk it. To the far right of the live room is another isolation room where Christ's amp would have been set up. It's worth noting that even though their amps were in these separate rooms, it is believed by the Pachyderm staff that these doors would have been left open during tracking. That way the band would have still had more of a live feel while recording, as opposed to the complete isolation of the elements in their headphones. To the left of the live room is the biggest and most grand isolation room, where an impressive collection of various types of keyboards live. On the outside glass of this room is this Lomo Microphones logo that was placed by Steve Albini himself, a physical mark that he has left in this storied space. If you were to walk straight through the isolation room where Kurt's amp was, you would now be in the control room. Being in here instantly brought this visual to my mind. The mixing of In Utero was done over 5 days. As Steve himself put it, that was also very straightforward. We basically just pushed the faders up and took it at a decent balance and then put it down. So we didn't really screw around a lot on any of it. I think we got 2 or 3 songs mixed every day. When we played the tapes back in the studio, everyone was just giddy. I remember thinking we had really pulled something off. Like we had really made a record that was what they had imagined in the beginning. It had a very big, ominous sound, but it wasn't uncultured. It wasn't entirely ugly, but it had an ugliness built into it that I thought suited the songs really well. Everyone was ecstatic when we were listening back to it on playback. In Utero is my favorite album of all time, songwriting and performance-wise especially. It's indescribable to be in the actual space where those sounds that shaped my life were actually captured. We may be 30 plus years removed from those sessions, but gosh, just standing there and taking it all in, thinking about how in February of '93, 3 guys were in this tiny, isolated Midwest town in the dead of winter, booked under a fake band name to have complete anonymity, creating and capturing sounds that would go on to become one of the most celebrated and significant rock albums of the modern era. The soundtrack of my life, which is a sentiment I know that many of my viewers share, was recorded within these walls. And it's not a stretch to speculate that In Utero was the work that Kurt was most proud of. As he said himself, I actually want to promote this record, not for the sake of selling records, but because I'm more proud of this record than anything I've ever done. We've finally achieved the sound that I've been hearing in my head. Something that I've brought up in previous videos is that desire that us fanatics have to get as close as possible to the music that we love. It's one thing to do guitar builds and tone recreations, which is what my channel was initially all about in the beginning. That all scratches the itch to a certain extent, but take it from me, there is absolutely no way to feel closer to that album than to physically be inside Pachyderm Studios. Growing up and being influenced by Nirvana as a teenager, I was so separated in time by those 3 guys that they almost felt like superheroes to an extent. Cartoon characters who seemed larger than life and that I would only ever see together in this state in pictures and videos. I think that's one reason why the mystique of this band is still so alluring 30 plus years after they played their last note together. Walking the same paths they did, stepping foot into the same rooms, even finding the spots they goofed off in, being in the physical space where that history happened really humanizes them and makes them feel more like relatable, real-life people, as opposed to superhero-like characters. And at 31 years old, I'm older than what everyone was in the band while they were at Pachyderm, which grounds them even more in my mind. They will always be widely regarded as these massive, influential, untouchable legends, but they were really just kids in a way. Very young adults just doing what they love while at the same time being thrusted onto the world stage and becoming a global phenomenon very fast in a short amount of time. I will never ever be able to thank the entire team over at Pachyderm enough for welcoming me in and for allowing me to tour and to document these historic grounds. There really is a magic in the air walking through there when you know the history. And my ultimate goal is that you were able to feel that same energy as we not only walked through the property together, but as we walked through the story of the In Utero recording sessions. This video is my love letter to my favorite album of all time, and my small tribute to Kurt Cobain and Steve Albini, whose work will forever live on and will always continue to inspire everyone it touches. Pachyderm is not just a historic Minnesota landmark, but a fully operating recording studio which is still producing amazing music to this day. I highly recommend checking out their website, which I will link here and in the video description, so you can get a taste of all the brilliant work that has come out and is still coming out of this facility. Even the day I was there, a band was scheduled to load in and make themselves at home so they could start work on their next project. Truly a dream come true to be able to walk these grounds and to take you with me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and an extra special shout out to my Patreon supporter. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Nirvana Guitars, and subscribe and check out my other Nirvana gear videos right here on YouTube.